I'll look at George Galloway's appearance on BBC's Question Time. I'll look at the UKIP policy in the forthcoming election to ban Shaqita if they get into power and the effects that's likely to have. This family decided to leave Britain, and we'll be asking why that's the case, and also perhaps some of the more appropriate solutions that could be applied for those of us experiencing anti-Semitism. Some wisdom not just from myself, but hopefully something more meaningful from a much wiser individual.
Gabriel Rosen, please.
Why is anti-Semitism rising in the UK?
Why is anti-Semitism...
And do you think a certain member of the panel may bear some responsibility for this?
Perfectly reasonable question, although probably more than the BBC or George Galloway had expected.
Gabriel Rosen, please.
Why is anti-Semitism rising in the UK?
Why is anti-Semitism...
And do you think a certain member of the panel may bear some responsibility for this?
So David probably getting some message in his ear to cut the lovely Gabriel short, but nevertheless the question was out there and the panel were eager to respond.
Somebody like George Galloway, who definitely has a following and an audience and has wonderful powers of rhetoric, we've heard them tonight, he and people like him need to exercise great responsibility in this area because it is incendiary, it's sensitive, and as we've seen from these figures today, it can lead to hate.
I'm very sorry that Jonathan Friedland, in what he has just said, has given credence to the absolutely false allegation implicit in the question. You see, I know about political violence. I was assaulted 3 times in 4 months in London. Well, you say I wonder why. This is, of course, making my point. You see, you're in favour of some political violence, but against other political violence. You're in favour of freedom of speech for some people, but not for others.
And of course that depends, George, exactly what it is you want to say, because we will stand up for your rights as long as you wish, as long as you're not being racially intolerant or fundamentally anti-Semitic.
Zionism and Israel are different things from Judaism and Jewishness. And anybody who confuses these two things, whether they're an anti-Semite or whether they are so-called leaders of the Jewish community, is making a grave mistake.
Well, that's not what I understood being Jewish was all about, and I'm appreciating George Galloway's definition, but perhaps we need to do a better job at telling the world, particularly in Britain, what it is that we like about Israel and why we are so connected to it as Jews.
Your question was about the rise in anti-Semitism. I think John used the word dispiriting. I'd use the word deeply depressing.
Well, from the Jewish community, we're grateful that the British government are depressed, but what exactly are they going to do about it? And perhaps it's time that we had a right of reply on behalf of the Jewish community as to what we think of George Galloway and what he says and the way he speaks.
George, your comments are deliberately provocative. Just last year, you declared Bradford an Israeli free zone. In doing so, what you did is you took a deep-rooted, multifaceted conflict in another area of the world and brought it to the streets of the UK. And in doing that, you directed your comments indirectly to the Jewish community. And as a result of that, you put the British Jewish community on the front line at a very volatile time.
Of course, George is speaking as a voice of an awful lot of people living in Britain at the moment. So let's not just point the finger at him, but his opinions do count for something. He's a white Anglo-Saxon speaking on behalf of a Muslim community who have, from what I can see, very poor leadership, either in Britain or in the whole of Europe. And that's probably what is lacking. But what we need is very clear definitions of what Jewish life is about in the diaspora, because otherwise George will carry on peddling this nonsense.
I beg you, don't conflate Zionism, Israel, and Jews in London. It's a very dangerous thing to do.
And then we have almost some reasonable thought from the man.
Oppose anti-Semitism and Islamophobia.
I'd say you got that wrong. Anti-Semitism is the deep, deep-seated hatred of Jews. Islamophobia is the fear of what Islam actually represents.
Why can't we oppose not just the attacks on kosher, but the attacks on halal?
Of course, I
which
oppose that too.
UKIP, who are not here tonight, just yesterday said they would ban, meaning that the observant Jews and observant Muslims in this country would have to leave the country. Why can't we unite around issues like that?
So George actually reaching out for a united front there, which I thought was rather sweet. This week's announcement from UKIP that they want to put in place a ban on religious slaughter, not just for kosher food, but as George was saying, for halal as well, is remarkable in that it's a bit of a turnaround.
And even if 71% of UKIP supporters are not comfortable with religious slaughter because they come from a different culture and a different background and it's not their way, that is not the same thing as saying to your community you should not be allowed to do it. And I think one of the things that is clear and consistent in UKIP is whatever our views, whatever our disputes, whatever our dislikes, we are fundamentally a strong libertarian party that says you may pursue what you wish to pursue, providing it doesn't hurt or affect me.
I'm a little confused, a bit like George Galloway, I suppose. If UKIP come to power, they'll ban shachita, and is that a form of anti-Semitism? Well, perhaps we should ask somebody who knows a little bit more about it. A couple of years ago, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, as he was then, told us a little bit about what Britain are doing about anti-Semitism.
It's led by a parliamentary committee on anti-Semitism, people of all parties who monitor on a regular basis all forms of anti-Semitism. That report is fed back into government, which assembles an interdepartmental committee, all the departments of government that have any bearing on it, education, health, Home Office and all that stuff. And all of those committees come together and interface with the Jewish organizations that deal with the symptoms of anti-Semitism. So it is basically a government-led activity.
So, the government-led activity that apparently doesn't seem to be having any effect. Now, I don't know if that's because the Jewish institutions have ignored some of the recommendations that the government have given, or if we're just suffering from the effects of a European-wide wave of anti-Semitism. But one thing's for sure, this particular family in Manchester have decided that it's just too late for them. They are moving to America, and their decision to be public about why they're moving is also quite remarkable. They're from a wealthy family, from all accounts. The reality is it's not an economic decision. It's actually a simple one of fear. And interesting that they haven't chosen Israel, but they've chosen America, because some of us are wondering how long even that great nation can prevent anti-Semitism from sweeping across those states and affecting their ways of life the way that clearly those in Britain are feeling right now.
My name's Ifa, I'm 14 and I'm a Muslim. We are just scared to think what they think of us.
My name's Hallie, I'm 13 and I'm Jewish.
Do you have any Muslim friends?
No.
Jewish and Muslim educators trying to bring some sense to the craziness of what it is to be Jewish or what it is to be Muslim. If the wider communities in Britain and Australia and America can see that these two very small groups can live alongside each other, I think you'll find multiculturalism will have renewed value. But I think until then,
Jews must never fight anti-Semitism alone. The victim cannot cure the crime. The hated cannot cure the hate.
It will take the persuasive powers of all political parties in each Western democracy to deal with this cancer that is anti-Semitism. And by all means, George Galloway, we should deal with Islamophobia as well. But let us not confuse the two, as one is truly terminal. Thank you for watching.